Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for November 8th, 2021. As the COP26 conference drags on in Glasgow, Scotland, it's becoming absolutely apparent that the world is divided between nations moving in completely different directions. On the one hand, you have the nations that are committed to the Green New Deal and the Great Reset, on a suicidal course that will lead to a rapid depopulation if they're successful in carrying out their plans from this conference. And on the other side are nations that are committed to investing in the physical economic production of their economies as sovereign nation states, committed to a future based on increases in energy flux density, which allow for increases in potential relative population density. Now, the Western Bloc, dominated by the United States, the UK, and the European Union, is moving toward a radical transition from reliable and sufficient energy sources and safe sources, the so-called fossil fuels and nuclear, to unreliable and inefficient forms of energy production, wind, solar, electric transport, and so on. Now, this requires austerity for the advanced sector. That is a cutback in investment in those areas of science and technology which would lead to increases in energy flux density, which is how you get cleaner energy. And at the same time, colonial rules against the development of the poorer nations, restricting credit, imposing draconian measures which prevent them from investing in the various areas of industry and manufacturing that are needed to care for a growing population. Economically, the division is between those committed to a green financial bubble, which would lead to lower productivity due to a reliance on energy from sources with lower energy flux density, and combined with that is the higher prices for energy because of the reduction, in fact, the cutoff of credit to fossil fuel exploration for new resources and so on, that's driving a hyperinflation, which is designed to protect the bankrupt financial system while shutting down production and living standards for all, not just in the poorer countries, but in the advanced countries as well. This is a suicidal policy, as we've identified from the beginning. And the alternative, the other direction, is coming from China, from Russia, to some extent from India, Indonesia, other countries in the developing sector. They may pay some lip service to what's being discussed in Glasgow, but in terms of their economic policy, they're moving to expand fossil fuel use, including natural gas and coal, and to move to the next generation of nuclear energy production. For China, with the Belt and Road Initiative as a driver, the economy has recovered from the effects of the lockdown they had to shut down the coronavirus pandemic. The Chinese economy grew in the first 3 quarters of this year at a 9.8% annual rate compared to 2020. Now, of course, that was a year of the pandemic, but that's a very significant increase in its overall production. Trade for China in the first 10 months of 2021 grew by 22.2%, and with the Belt and Road Initiative partners of China, it grew by 23%. Now, China Daily had some comments on this to explain what China did that's working. One is they took measures to contain the coronavirus. Many in the West called these authoritarian, but they've been effective. At the same time, they've moved ahead with advances in high technology production, both in terms of manufacturing, in terms of transportation, communication, and so on, which has led to an increase in productivity. This is the model that we used to have in the West. Now, the Global Times had a very trenchant response to the Biden praising of the bipartisan bill which passed, the so-called infrastructure bill. What they report is that this will lead to, quote, false prosperity papered over by quantitative easing and excessive money printing. A fairy tale to revitalize U.S. competitiveness relying merely on a stimulus bill, unquote. Fairly accurate assessment. And then a second article in the Global Times refers to the quote, hollowing out of the U.S. manufacturing sector means that its domestic industries don't have the production capacity to support what Biden is calling the once-in-a-generation infrastructure construction. And we see that not just in the supply chains, but in the fact that many industries are not being restarted. There's no intent to restart them. The credit is being diverted to the carbon transition, which means to lower forms of energy production, as opposed to those areas which would allow for increases in the productivity of the workforce. So the Global Times has it absolutely right. They're saying that the United States, in order to carry out a full-scale infrastructure plan, would need cooperation with China. And this, of course, is something that the Chinese have continued to offer to allow the United States to join in with the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, in the midst of this COP26 ongoing conference, the Financial Times, which is one of the leading publications of the City of London, has an article titled "The Climate Pledge is Too Big to be Credible." And they trash the proposals coming from Prince Charles and Governor Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, the Davos financial pirates, and others, when they say they can provide access to $130 trillion to fund the green transition. The Financial Times points out that this is based on faulty accounting. The money is not there, that there's double counting, and what is there is not necessarily going to be committed to this project. And they say as a result, it leads to over-promising and under-delivering. And they question the 130 trillion figure. They say that implies there's funds ready to invest. The reality is, according to the Financial Times, that the private sector cannot fund this transition, despite the promises being made by Carney, Michael Bloomberg, and others, that the carbon transition will require huge state intervention and investment. Now, this is in keeping with the Great Reset that is underway, which includes cutting off funding of real physical production and channeling all credit into the bubble. Now, the Financial Times article does not mention certain things that are important to note about this conference. They don't mention that the so-called climate change science is in dispute, meaning many credible scientists dispute the idea that there's warming or climate change based on man-made capacities and man-made concerns. That this means that the transition will have little effect on climate, but it will divert funds from what should be invested in other necessary areas of infrastructure, real infrastructure, including energy production based on increasing the energy flux density of your sources, flood control, water management, and investment in the physical economy. That's cut out by this conference. So instead, they're going to be taking land out of productive use and turn it into acres or square miles of silly, inefficient windmill parks and solar panels. Now, this is a prescription for genocide, for depopulation. And whether it's discussed or not, that's the intent of many of the people who are supporting the climate conference, including Prince Charles himself, whose family has long been supporting the idea that there are too many people and that we need a drastic reduction of human population. And they've grabbed onto the idea of the environment as the basis for enforcing these policies, which means they've been conducting a brainwashing over several generations to convince people that this is an unsustainable economy and you cannot support 7+ billion people on the planet. Now, this is especially seen when you hear the utterings of people like Greta Thunberg, who said at this rally yesterday that the older generation will die of old age, her generation will die due to climate change. That's the kind of lying and manipulation which is being used to try and bludgeon poorer countries into accepting the outcome of the financial asset financing that's being worked out at the COP26 conference, bludgeoning those countries into giving up their plans for development for a false promise of a clean energy future. This will be one of the topics at the conference coming up this weekend, November 13th and 14th, by the Schiller Institute, and you can register for it at schillerinstitute.com. I would urge you to not just register, but to participate, to bring your friends and coworkers in to participate in the online events, as we'll be presenting solutions that don't require you to commit suicide in order to save the planet. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.